Hello everyone, welcome back to another session of the Analyst for 11 July 2023. This is Bijit and I will be taking through you the various insights from the Indian Express and the Hindu which are tailored suitably for the UPSC aspirants and also for all the general curious minds out there. Now before we start our session, let me take you through the very humble words of a highly public intellectual, Albert Einstein, who said that those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act. Now, so that let us leave all our doubts behind. Let us be very dutiful. Let us have a high amount of determination in all walks of our lives. And thereon, we shall be able to realize the success that we actually started for. Now, with this, let us look at the table of contents for 11th July. The first article is discussing about the global south, which is a term that we see in the news quite often nowadays. The next article is with respect to the fallout between Foxconn and Vedanta with respect to Indian semiconductor sector. The next article is again with respect to checking freebies in Indian elections, wherein the Central Board of Indirect Taxes have issued standards or procedures with respect to the distribution of freebies, liquor and other items during elections. The next article is with respect to the Chandrayaan 3 mission, which is geared up for launch on 14th of July, which will be a spectacular event for India because India is again sending its lunar mission to the moon. The final article we will be wrapping up the session with is with respect to placemaking, and this is a very interesting term with respect to the urban sector in India. Okay, now let us start with the very first article with respect to the global south, and this is a term that we have seen in the news quite often nowadays, right? Now, before starting this discussion, let me take you through various details and various basics of this article. Now, the center of this discussion is with respect to the development of countries all across the world. Now, if we realize that development is an all-round improvement in the economic sector, in the social sector, and also with respect to the environmental sector at large. So, we have to understand that throughout the span of human civilization, development in various countries have not been equitable. Various countries have been divided on the basis of historical factors, social factors, political factors, economical factors, and hence development is a multifaceted factor if we look at the contours of our global politics today, right? So from time immemorial, there have been efforts to classify different countries based on their development, right? The first effort at classifying the countries with respect to the development arose during the World War II. When the World War II concluded and largely the US emerged as the most strong country around the world, US had their own allies. US and their allies constituted the first world countries. The second world countries belonged to the camp of the USSR. And those countries who chose to remain non-aligned, such as India, Egypt, Yugoslavia, those countries came to be a part of the third world countries. Now, this classification was according to the scholars at that time. Gradually, after the conclusion of the Cold War, this classification no longer hold fort. Then, the world and the scholars, they focused on evolving the classification based on developed countries, developing countries, and the underdeveloped countries. But again, this word or these words centered the comparison with the West. So, in a sense, this classification was again reeking of too much Western idealism. Then, a new approach came. A new approach emerged which was given by Karl Obeski, who told that the world is now divided on global characteristics with several strands. So before we get into the strands aspect, let us see how actually the world is divided based on this global approach. Now, in accordance with this approach, we have several countries which belong to global north. The countries are Canada, US, most of the Western European countries, Russia, some countries of the Eastern Europe too, Australia, Japan. So we can understand these are highly industrialized countries. And again, at the same time, we have countries belonging from Latin America and Caribbean Ocean. We have Europe and Central Asian countries, South Asian countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. We have nations from Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North America, and also from East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Ocean countries. So these ocean countries or these several countries have various interlinkages with each other, and specifically they share some aspects of their developmental characteristics with themselves. Now, is this difference or approach based on geography? No, it is purely a geopolitical entity because there are some common threads that are binding all these countries together. The very first prominent thread is the thread of historical development, right? Now, if we look closely at all these countries, they either have one point of time been the colonies of major industrial powers back then, right? Mostly it were the UK, it were the countries like Germany, France. Then they were also under the high garb of ideology known as the imperialism, which is a deeper connection beyond colonialism, which penetrates market, people, connections, right? So imperialism and colonies bind these countries together at one point of time. Then comes the economical development, because all of the countries of the global south, if we look closely, they are still developing nations. They have a high amount of middle class population which are growing at a rapid rate, right? Then the political systems and democracy is also at a very infant stage in these countries. Countries such as Latin America, countries such as the sub-Saharan countries of Africa, they are at the early stages of their democracy. They are having lots of conflicts among themselves, and they are still yet to evolve a particular amount of political system on one hand. On the other hand, countries like India, some countries like from the Southeast Asia, they have proper and well-functioning democracies. The social institution in these countries with respect to families, community, it's still existing at a traditional level. Countries like India emphasize high amount of importance on the institutions such as family, such as community. We still have high amount of respect for our family members. But if we compare this with respect to the West, this is not the same. The next strand is the periphery of West, wherein the global South countries are sometimes considered that they are within the periphery of the West, where the West or particularly the US is at the center, right? And finally, globalization has brought around change, has brought around political change, economical change in all of the global South countries in some way or the other. So these are all the common threads that bind all the global South countries together. And that is why this term is quite an appropriate term for these nations. And the 21st century is actually known to be their own century. According to the World Bank, there have been huge shifts in wealth from the global north to the global south, particularly if we consider countries like China and India, who are seeing vast amount of wealth being generated due to their skyrocketing increase in their gross domestic product, right? Then we have countries again like China, India, and most of the African nations who have a huge bulk of population which is increasing nowadays. So this is shifting the game of demography, which is causing the West to age. That means the industrialized nations, the West is nowadays aging in nature, where the young populations are coming out from the global south, and these is creating huge amount of economic opportunities specifically for the private sector to invest their capital into these countries. Next, the 21st century belongs to the global south because there is huge amount of technical progress in nations like China, like Brazil, like India. We are seeing a huge amount of technical progress, be it in the field of biotechnology, be it in the field of space. We are seeing huge amount of growth. The global south to south cooperation is also seen specifically through Indian initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, like the recently concluded Voice of South Summit in Delhi, which was actually headed by our Prime Minister. So the south to south cooperation has been also been seen prominently. And with respect to the global influence of the south or global south countries, we can see there countries like China, they are exerting their diplomatic forces to become more prominent. India is also trying to become more dominant in the diplomatic arena. The culture and diaspora is again a very important factor with respect to countries belonging to the global south, because we can see a large amount of people from the Philippines, from the Indonesia, from China, especially from India. They are migrating all across the world, and they are spreading their cultures, they are spreading their cuisines, they are spreading their art, literature, dance forms to across the world. And a very prominent example is the spread of yoga. So we can see that the 21st century is generally belonging to them. And also, according to a very popular report by World Bank, by 2030, it is said that 3 out of the 4 countries will be from the global south in respect to the economic size. Now, there are also challenges which are plaguing the global south. The first challenge is the inequity, is the high amount of inequity which is absorbed from the global north. There are high rates of poverty, there are high rates of inequality with respect to these countries, specifically in the sub-Saharan Africa. Also, the countries within themselves, they have high amount of inequalities. If we take the case of India also, we have high amount of inequality in various aspects, in various principalities, right? Then a very important concern with respect to the global south has been the environmental degradation and the very burning issue of historical responsibility. This historical responsibility is with respect to the emissions of carbon dioxide that actually began from the part of the global north countries during the Industrial Revolution. Now, the brunt of these emissions is actually being borne by these global south nations. So, they are also facing huge challenges of environmental declarations. Conflicts are still going on in nations like Syria, in most of the African countries, in Afghanistan. So, these countries are also seeing a turmoil in with respect to their political stability. And finally, such countries are also home to diseases like HIV, right? Even the corona pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic is suspected to have broken out from China. So these are also highly populated countries, and there are chances that most often diseases will be breaking out. So these are the challenges that the global south are facing. And also, the main context of this article was that, the Russia and the Ukraine crisis which is going on. This is also a war or kind of indirect conflict which is going on between the global south and the global north, because most of the global south countries, it has been seen that they are siding with Russia in this conflict, right? Because these countries are finding it more convenient on their side to not side with the global north in some of the issues, while they are also conveniently taking sides with them on various issues, right? So to conclude this, the global south is a region of great diversity and potential, And it is said, I already told, that 21st century is their own century. And according to our own Prime Minister, the global south must be united in voice and united in purpose to actually realize the main benefits of the cooperation at this south and south level. Right? Okay, now with this, let us move on to the next article. This is with respect to the recent fallout between the Vedanta group and the Foxconn, which is a kind of a setback for Indian semiconductor industry. The issue has been that these two companies did not come to terms with respect to their various modifications and insights with respect to Indian semiconductor industry. Now let us not get into too much details about the deal or what actually were the reasons behind this. Now our takeaway from this discussion will be the very word semiconductor and also the various issues and challenges and some of the government initiatives related to the semiconductor industry. Now semiconductor is a material which lies between a conductor and an insulator, and they have high potential, or they are very important with respect to our Indian economy, because this is one of the critical sectors, because we can identify the semiconductors that are being used in most of the electronic appliances such as cars, mobiles, smartwatches, our laptops, computers, aeroplanes, submarines. We are using semiconductors everywhere, and it is very crucial that any country, they should be keeping a hold of this particular sector at large. Now, if we look at the global semiconductor sales by country according to 2021 levels, USA has been the top leader in this market. The country is holding around 50% of the global sales. This is being followed by South Korea and the rest of the world. We can see that Taiwan and China are also close competitors, with Taiwan being holding around 8% of the global sales and China holding around 7%. So we can see these are all the important stakeholders. And with respect to India, we do not see our name in this list here. So India, naturally, with its huge resources of human capital, India would also like to garner a stake in this development. So according to a report, India's consumption of semiconductors is expected to cross $80 billion by 2026. Right? And it is also expected to reach $110 billion by 2030, which is not far away. So definitely, India will have a particular amount of interest with respect to semiconductor industry. Now this Vedanta and Foxconn deal, which fallout, which is not a very good news for our semiconductor industry or semiconductor aspirations. So we as a particular nation must have a particular need for increasing our domestic manufacturing of semiconductors. The first need is that the semiconductors are the foundation stone for the modern electronic sectors. Now, be it from the minuscule Internet of Things devices, right, to huge spacecrafts, semiconductors are used everywhere. So, we must be involving ourselves in the next round of modern electronic industry. We also have a huge import dependency on semiconductors, with India importing more than 90% of the requirements, right, from the other nations. And it is expected that our demand will be rising to $100 billion by 2025. So we can see this is a large amount of foreign currency which is going outside of our country. Then we must be also overcoming the disruption in the supply chain of semiconductors that was particularly seen during the COVID crisis. What happened during the COVID-19 is that most of the semiconductor industries all around the globe, they were closed because of the pandemic. Now when they opened, they suddenly face a massive demand for semiconductors, which rapidly pushed up the prices. And if the prices of semiconductors are being pushed up, or there is an inflation in the price of the semiconductor items, there is nationally an inflation in the economy. Now to understand this, let us go through the various stages of the semiconductor value chain. Now this is very important to understand because from here only we will be deciding on which aspects India or Indian government will be specifically targeting a particular value chain of the semiconductor industry. The first stage is with respect to design. Now in this design stage, there are further two components. One is the design software, which actually is a software given by companies known as Synopsys, Intel, Cadence. They actually give the software to various companies to design semiconductor chips. Here, the US has a monopoly of around 40%. So this is generally a kind of a US monopoly. Then with respect to intellectual property, Intel is a company that leads this sector. So we can say US is again dominating this particular design stage. Then comes the stage of fabrication, where we will be transforming the various raw ingredients into ready-made silicon processes, right? Or these are also known as processed silicon wafers, right? Now in this, the materials and chemicals stage and manufacturing equipment stage are generally located in countries like Japan, Germany, and some other countries like even China and South Korea. So these are again industrialized countries, and India does not even have a significant hold in this respect. Finally, with respect to assembly and testing, again, these are the countries which are prominent in this value chain. So naturally, India will want to participate in this value chain because these all separate chains are spread across entire the world, and India will obviously want to invest and take the benefit out of this opportunity. Besides this, the strategic significance also gains tremendous importance. Specifically right now, we are looking at China becoming too much aggressive. And with respect to Taiwan, they are also facing crisis, particularly from China also. So, most of the semiconductor companies right now are trying to diversify their source from Taiwan to countries like South Asian countries like India, Bangladesh, and also Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam. So India has also a window of opportunity to capture this strategic importance that we must be realizing that the semiconductor companies are now looking for some alternate source. India has realized this, and that's why it is trying to embark on a journey in this industry. Finally, it is all about attracting investments, because if we attract foreign investments, it will be giving us impetus to our manufacturing sectors. It will be giving impetus to our exports. It will be giving impetus to the skilling requirements of our local population. All this will be finally culminating in the growth of GDP. So, at the core, we have various needs with respect to domestic manufacturing of semiconductors. Now, with respect to that, government did some efforts in this particular aspect. The first effort came in the Make in India, which government boosted various incentives to make in India. Then we have the India Semiconductor Mission, which again provided a huge boost, huge impetus in 2021 for attracting the semiconductor companies. The semiconductor design companies were given special impetus for designing integrated circuits, SoC units. So around 100 companies will be chosen, of which minimum 20 companies, they will be getting an incentive of around 1,500 crores in 5 years. The production linked initiative is another scheme which is promoting the semiconductor industry. This is offering to our companies, to the companies which will be investing in India, 76,000 crores, right, with 50% of the fiscal support from the center. Then we have Chip to Startup program. This is again a very significant program where we will be training around 85,000 engineers for 5 years, and we will be encouraging them to set up startups in this particular arena. Finally, we have the recent design linked incentives where we are targeting this phase, this very crucial phase of our global value chain in the semiconductor industry. So in this, let us continue reviewing proposals, because these Vedanta and Foxconn, which ended or concluded their deals, right? This is not the end of the tunnel for us. We have several proposals lined up, so the government must be reviewing every proposal carefully, and they shall be negotiating with the companies to reap out the maximum benefits for India. And finally, we must realize that the bus is arriving in our favor right now. We must not missing the bus with respect to the semiconductor industry, because I told earlier that most of the companies are now looking at India to set up their shop. So we must attract them and we must provide them various incentives so that they can set up, and we can also begin our journey in this semiconductor value chain. Now, the next article is again a very crucial and important article. This is with respect to the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs issuing standard procedures to bring in the freebies, the distribution of liquor to the voters during times of election. And elections are right now very close for some states, and also in the next year we have the general elections also. Now, before this, let us go into the debate and the various intricacies and basics of this debate. We know that our Indian state, right, believes in the welfare concept. This means that the Indian state is looking to develop and boost the capabilities of our human capital. This is directly enshrined in the directive principles of our state policy, right? And if we think closely, it is a basic duty of any state to provide basic services like food, like nutrition, education, health for their citizens, and specifically for those citizens who cannot afford them, like the marginalized population and the vulnerable sections. So that is why India is a welfare state, and it believes in the upliftment of the poorest, which is also following the Gandhian spirit. So in accordance to that, we have public provisions, and let us divide the public provisions into two parts: public or merit goods and freebies. Now, public goods, in the words of Dr. Amartya Sen, the noted economist, these are very important for boosting the capability of the population. This is also known as capability approach, a very, very important term that you can readily use in your mains answers for excellent value addition. This is given by Amartya Sen. According to capability approach, the various basics capabilities like food, shelter, nutrition, education, health, these are the basic constituents that actually drives human capital. And further, human capital or increase in the human capital will be leading to increase in our growth and development. So it is very crucial that we follow this capability approach with respect to provision of public goods and services from the taxes that we collect from the people. So the various merit goods in India which are given are in the form of public distribution systems that give free cereals, free food items to the poorest of poorest and to the targeted beneficiaries. We have in India free education, right? We have right to education, which is again a public good. But also on the other side of the spectrum, there are some goods known as freebies. While let me remind you that public goods are mobilized from the taxes that the government collect, and most of the time and almost every time these are free in nature. But let us draw the distinction between public goods or merit goods from the freebies, because freebies are goods like, say, free smartphones, free laptops, electricity, water. These are given generally with some strings. These are generally given during the time of elections and with a view to win those elections by giving out doles or gift. In the words of our Prime Minister, this is also known as reverie culture or a culture of gift giving. That means some of the political parties, they offer various incentives which are generally free in nature and which are not basic in nature, or which do not follow this capability approach per se. Right? Now, the most differentiating factor that we should be keeping in mind are through these questions. The questions are that with respect to freebies, are there any strings attached? Are there any conditionalities that a particular political party is giving you these benefits? For what? Who are the targeted beneficiaries? Who are the beneficiaries who are getting these freebies? Are only the poor and the marginalized people getting, for example, the free electricity and free water? Are we only providing them to the most vulnerable sections of the population, or we are giving it to all? Can they afford themselves? Can the beneficiaries who are given this particularly smartphones and laptops, can they afford them? And yes, if they can, this is not benefiting them at large, right? Is it easing the access of these commodities for everyone in this market? For example, if I am giving a smartphone, right, to every student of class 12 or say every college student, is it actually easing the access for all? It is not, right? Then finally, are these freebies filling gaps? Are these freebies filling gaps? Or for example, if I am giving a particular household a free gas connection, am I ensuring that I am filling the gap by providing this gas connection to the people who desperately need? And if I am providing them, am I providing them efficient service? Am I providing them efficient consultancy? Am I providing them all other benefits? So these are the questions that we have to differentiate from a merit good and a freebie. Now, the prevalence of this freebie culture is very prominent nowadays. Let us look at this through the lens of data. And let me tell you that all these data are very good, important value additions for your mains answers. So let us keep this information in our notebook. According to RBI, states with the highest subsidy burden are Punjab, Rajasthan, Kerala, West Bengal, Bihar. And why are we talking about subsidy burden? Because the states are providing subsidies based out of their own coffers. And these subsidies are generally funding the freebies. The states are Punjab, Rajasthan, Kerala, West Bengal and Bihar, which are the top 5 states. Then with respect to expenditure on freebies, these vary between 0.1% to 2% of our overall gross state domestic product. So all of the states had an average of around 0.1% to 2.7%. So this is a major implication, right? Then the states of Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is having 1/3 of the country's overall dues with respect to the losses in the power distribution companies. Or in essence, Tamil Nadu is a state which is heavily burdened by giving free electricity. Punjab is expected to be worst hit because it is expected that their debt to gross state GDP ratio will be hitting 45% by 2027. And if we compare the 2 years, 2020 to 21 and 2021 to 2022, there has been a growth of subsidies that has been given by the states at 12.9% in 2020-21 and 11.2% in 2021-22. So these are serious data. This implies that the states are overburdened. And finally, let us look at the states which are announcing freebies during this period of time. Punjab, the state of Punjab is having their burden at around 2.7%, right? Followed by Andhra Pradesh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and West Bengal in these parameters. So let us have a brief idea of these parameters so that we can use these in our mains answers. Right. Now, what are the issues with freebies? According to S. Subramaniam Balaji case of 2013, unrealistic poll promises and freebies disturb the level playing ground in elections. Now, take the example of any state and any state political party which are prominent, right? They will be having enough financial resources. Now, what about the other political parties? Do they have enough financial provisions to give out freebies? So is it not tilting the level playing field in favor of the person or the political party who is having money power? So is that ensuring free and fair elections? This is a question we have to answer. The state financials, as we have seen in the previous slide, is hinging on the part of fiscal indiscipline. And according to our 15th Finance Commission, right, the 15th Finance Commission has warned that this will amount to catastrophic results for the public at large. At the end of the day, the public or the common people will suffer due to heavy debt burden, because finally this burden had to be mobilized in forms of higher taxes, right? And also, when the burden will become too big, it can be the fact that the governments, the respective state governments, can withdraw the freebies. So the public will be suffering in that respect. It also breeds a culture of dependency, because if we are giving free items to a particular population, they become dependent on a particular political party. This again tilts the field of free and fair elections. Priorities also are not addressed properly, because it is very easy to give free items or say give gifts to just woo the voters, but it is very difficult to focus on long-term activities or long-term goals, such as focusing on road infrastructure, such as focusing on school infrastructure. So these are the responsibilities where the state governments also have a role. So they must be balancing their long-term and short-term priorities. Also, often it is seen that the provision of freebies diverts the important policy debates from the general public. Right? It has been seen that this has been used as a manipulative agent when we go on with respect to policy debates or any debates which are linked to the governance of the particular state government. And finally, this also increases inequality and corruption, because you have to understand, if you are giving freebies to all people, this is doing what? This is further increasing the inequality. Because if everyone, if the haves and have-nots are equally having the provision of public goods, then is it not increasing the inequality? Is it not increasing corruption? Because we are increasingly being reliant on the government for provision of our free goods. It has been seen in cases of various state governments when the state officials are, withholding the benefits in return for cash. So it is further breeding corruption. Now, with respect to way ahead, let us remember the words of Pranab Mukherjee, our late former president. He told that free, fair, credible elections are the lifeblood of democracy. And that is why we must be focusing on giving proper amount of democracy to the people at large. We must be going with merit goods. Merit goods are actually boosting the capability, according to the capability approach by Amartya Sen. These are actually focusing on the human capital. Right? This is with respect to reducing the inequality. Then, as a prominent step, as of now, EC or Election Commission of India can only censure a party. They cannot take steps with respect to penalties, or say, totally deregistering a political party. So we can deliberate this in our Indian Parliament with respect to this issue, that we should be arming the Election Commission with such powers. And finally, the context of this article is about the standard of procedures which has been issued by the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs. So let us follow these SOPs with letter and spirit. The first is that all income tax officers must be watching on the distribution of freebies and liquor. They must be required to collect and analyze information from all sources of information, the social media, news report, etc. They must be investigating and taking appropriate action. If needed, they can even take criminal actions against the political parties. And finally, they must be coordinating with other enforcement agencies like the state police, like the CBI, like the ED. So they must be coordinating with respect to these also. Right. Now the next article is with respect to our Chandrayaan 3 mission, which is scheduled for launch at 14 July, roughly around 2:35 p.m. in the afternoon. So let us wait for the launch. But before that, let us have also a brief amount of information and background related to Chandrayaan 3. Now Chandrayaan 3 is the third in part of our mission, or lunar mission, and this is generally divided into three parts. The module or Chandrayaan module will be having three different parts. First is the lander module, propulsion module, and the rover. Now the lander module will be making the soft landing. That means it will be making a very precise, very accurate and a soft landing on the surface of the moon. Why we are aiming for this? Because we are aiming for the south side of the moon, or the south pole of the moon, where it is said that there are frozen water samples. So essentially, the Chandrayaan 3 is a scientific mission that is being sent by the ISRO to the moon to analyze the various water samples out there, correct? It also carries the rover in the lander module. Then with respect to the propulsion module, we have the propulsion module will be serving the task of 100 km circular polar orbit around the moon, which will be finally releasing the lander module on the surface of the moon. Then the propulsion module will be having scientific payloads, right? And finally the rover part will be actually carrying out the chemical analysis that I discussed before, right? Okay, and this will be launched in the launch vehicle Mark III. This is nothing but the GSLV Mark III, which is a 3-stage launcher, and the upper cryogenic stage is actually powered by India's most powerful cryogenic engine, the CE-200. Further, two S-200 solid rocket boosters will be also aiding this mission. So let us wait eagerly for this launch, and I'm sure that all of you will be watching it live. Okay. Now, the last article is with respect to urban spaces in India and how various communities, various Indians, various citizens can reclaim various vacant urban spaces for their particular development. This will be very important case studies which will be used in our mains answers, and also in prelims. It has been found that UPSC has been asking some important terms and we have to answer what the terms actually are. So let us look at the very first, reclamation of urban spaces. Now in India, 34% of the population lives in cities. So it is very important that we focus on Indian cities. So reclamation means we are converting vacant lots into parks or gardens. For example, you have seen many spaces around your public area are vacant. So we can effectively use these spaces. Then we can close the streets to make them pedestrian only zones, as we seen in the streets of Paris. We can repurpose abandoned village buildings into community centers or cultural centers. We can also create temporary public spaces for events and festivals. Right? So these are all the important activities that we can do with the vacant spaces that we have in our urban areas, in our cities, in our towns. Now, a very important term comes into picture, which is known as placemaking. Here, in urban centers, the emphasis is more on people than infrastructure. Now, what does this mean? That the urban ecosystem or the urban design, the urban patterns must be more people friendly rather than infrastructure friendly. It must be welcoming for the people to go to various urban spaces such as parks, water parks, entertainment areas, community centers, meeting zones, pavements. They all must be, very people friendly. And placemaking is exactly that. It is a process of creating public places that are actually livable, that are actually inviting you to come and enjoy there, have a talk there, have a walk there with your friends, right? It is actually accessible to everyone. Now, some important case studies in India is, one is in the state of Jabalpur in Madhya Pradesh, where a primary healthcare center, right, has been transformed into an outdoor play area for children. Where the primary healthcare center is there, but the area around there has been transformed into an area where the people can play, where children can play. There is an 8 to 80 park in Pimpri Chinwad, right, where all walks of the population can go and enjoy there, right? This is transformed in the city of Pimpri Chinwad. We have a forest colony in Kohima, Nagaland, which has been transformed from a garbage patch to a roadside park. Also, we have a very interesting case study of triangulation. If we can observe this picture, we are seeing that this is a mural or a very interesting painting on the walls of a building. Here we have eateries, right? And here we can have some public place like, a eatery, or this can even be an office, correct? So we can see we are triangulating what? These three aspects where murals, eateries are appealing to the people, and the people who are working at office, they can also feel at home, that these places are very welcoming in nature. So this was all for today. I hope you learned a lot from today's discussion, and I hope you do well in your preparation. Wishing you all the best. We'll be meeting again in the near future. Thank you.